Mr. Jenkins, at 85 years old, was a gentle presence in the small town that had been his home for the better part of his life. His weathered face told the tale of countless experiences, etching lines that revealed the wisdom he had gathered over the years. His deep-set eyes, which had witnessed the changing seasons of both his town and his own life, glistened with a quiet longing. His cozy cottage, nestled on a serene street shaded by ancient oak trees, included an inviting warmth that welcomed visitors with open arms. The porch, adorned with potted plants and a well-worn-out rocking chair, seemed to invite passers-by to pause and share stories. On this particular crisp evening, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees outside his window. Mr. Jenkins sat in his favorite armchair. The upholstery had seen better days, but it cradled him in comfort as he leaned back, lost in thought. He reached for the local newspaper, its pages worn and yellowed with age, filled with stories of the town he had known intimately for decades. As he perused the paper, his eyes locked onto a section titled Personal Ads. His fingers, withered and strong, traced the words of an advertisement placed there, capturing his heartfelt plea with each deliberate movement. He longed for companionship, a connection that would bridge the aching void he felt inside. He yearned for the warmth of a loving wife to brighten his days, to chase away the shadows of solitude that had become his constant companions. The gossip in town news of Mr. Jenkins' unexpected personal ad quickly permeated the tight-knit community, spreading like wildfire from one household to the next. Gossipy whispers, judgments, and raised eyebrows became the currency of conversation among the town's residents. Neighbors, who had exchanged waves and friendly nods for years, couldn't help but discuss the matter with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Miss Thompson, Mr. Jenkins' next-door neighbor, was one of the first to hear about it. She turned to her husband one evening as they sat in their cozy living room. The soft glow of the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Have you heard about Mr. Jenkins?" she asked, her voice filled with a hint of intrigue. "He's placed an ad in the newspaper seeking a wife. Such an evil old man, this seems so bad." Her husband, a man known for his wisdom and compassion, placed his newspaper aside and looked at her thoughtfully. "Well, my dear," he began, "we should remember that we may never truly know what burdens others carry. Loneliness can weigh heavily, especially in one's late years. Perhaps Mr. Jenkins is seeking something we cannot fully comprehend." Unfazed by the gossip and whispers that now buzzed through the town, Mr. Jenkins felt an overwhelming need to unburden his heart and share the story of his life with those willing to listen. He believed that in opening up, he could shed light on the depths of his loneliness, the ache that had persisted for years. Gathering some of his neighbors in his inviting living room, he ensured the room was bathed in a soft, comforting glow by lighting a fire in the fireplace. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an ambiance that seemed tailor-made for storytelling. As his guests settled into the plush chairs and cozy nooks of his living room, they were met with the comforting scent of cedarwood and the faint crackling of the fire. With a deep breath, Mr. Jenkins began his tale. "My dear friends," he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of memories. "I feel compelled to share my story with you. You see, many years ago, I was blessed with a love that illuminated every corner of my existence." His voice trembled with nostalgia, like a delicate tune that had been dormant for too long. As he continued to speak, he recounted the vivid memories of his youth, the days filled with laughter, the shared dreams, and the warmth of the love he had experienced alongside his late wife, Mary. The room seemed to come alive with the echo of their past, as if the very walls held onto the traces of their happiness. As Mr. Jenkins continued, the emotions within him flowed like a river. His voice quivered As he spoke of Mary's battle with illness, recalling the countless nights he spent at her side, he described the tireless care he had provided, never once wavering in his devotion to the woman who had become the cornerstone of his life. "My dear Mary," he whispered, as if saying her name could summon her presence. "She was the love of my life." His words hung in the air, imbued with the profound love he had shared with Mary. The room grew still as the listeners absorbed the depths of his feelings. The dancing flames seemed to flicker in sympathy, casting haunting shadows across the room. With great care, Mr. Jenkins continued his heartbreaking story, revealing the tragedy that had struck his life with devastating force. "And then, when I thought the pain couldn't possibly be more unbearable, I lost our beloved daughter in a car accident, Sarah, at the tender age of 35. His words were laden with sorrow. As he spoke of the loss of his daughter, the room was filled with a poignant silence, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire. The gathering neighbors could feel the heaviness in Mr. Jenkins' heart, and their own soul ached in empathy for the man who had endured so much. His story was a tapestry woven with threads of love and loss, and in that moment they began to understand the depths of his loneliness. Mr. Jenkins' recounting of his life's journey continued to resonate deeply with those who once cast judgment upon him. As they listened to the intricacies of his story, the townsfolk began to realize that his plea for companionship emerged from a profound well of loneliness, an emptiness that echoed with the absence of the people he had once cherished the most in the world. His relatives and all the people he considered family left him. They were never interested if he was doing okay. In the days that followed his heartfelt confession, his neighbors found themselves reflecting on their initial skepticism. They pondered the weight of the burdens Mr. Jenkins had carried, losses that had carved chasms in his heart. Mrs. Thompson, who had been among those who initially questioned his motives, felt her heart undergo transformation. She turned to her husband one quiet evening, their own living room bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, and whispered with a sincerity she hadn't known before. "Perhaps we've been too quick to judge, dear. I made a mistake. We never asked him if he needs something. We never knew his past story and life." Her husband, who had always admired her compassionate nature, nodded in agreement. "You're right, my love," he replied. "We may not have walked in Mr. Jenkins' shoes, but we should understand the journeys others have taken. It's never too late to extend a hand of friendship." Empathy replaced judgment as the townsfolk continued to absorb Mr. Jenkins' story, and they were moved by the depths of his loneliness. Neighbors who had once observed him from afar now offered to visit him regularly. They came bearing freshly baked goods, thoughtful gifts, and the warmth of companionship that had been missing from Mr. Jenkins' life. People who had exchanged casual greetings and polite smiles reached out with heartfelt words of kindness. They shared stories of their own struggles, their own battles with isolation, and in doing so, they created a bridge of understanding between them and Mr. Jenkins. The town's attitude towards him underwent a profound transformation. Skepticism and judgment were replaced with sympathy and compassion. Mr. Jenkins, who had long felt like a solitary figure in the landscape of his own life, now found himself enveloped in warmth he hadn't experienced in years. His home, once a refuge from the world's prying eyes, became a place of support and genuine care. On a sunny afternoon, Mr. Jenkins was sitting on his porch and enjoying the cool breeze on his tired skin, when he heard the faint sound of footsteps coming up behind him. When he looked down the road that led to his house, he was surprised and happy to see a figure coming up behind him. The woman was Miss Emily Anderson, 58 years old, and had just lost her husband. People in the small town told her about Mr. Jenkins and his search for a friend, and something in his story touched her deeply. Emily had been through the pain of being alone since her husband died, so she could relate to Mr. Jenkins' story of longing and loss. Emily greeted Mr. Jenkins with a smile that showed she was kind and understanding. "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. This is Emily Anderson. I heard your story and I know how lonely you feel." Mr. Jenkins got up from his rocking chair and put out his hand, his eyes sparkling with surprise and thanks. "It's nice to meet you, Emily," he said, and his voice was truly friendly. "Please come with me. I was just taking in the sun in the afternoon." Emily found a chair nearby on the porch and settled down. The cozy space and the smell of flowers in bloom made her feel calm. When they started to talk, it was easy for them, like a river finding its own path. As Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson continued to tell their stories over cups of fragrant tea, served in pretty china cups, the sky turned orange and pink in a golden sunset. The new warmth that had come into their lives seemed to be reflected in the warmth of the setting sun. They felt better when they were with each other, and their lives intertwined like threads in a tapestry, making a rich and complex pattern of things they had in common. They talked about how painful it was to lose loved ones, how the roads of sadness were long and winding, and how loneliness had settled over them like a heavy shroud. After all the family they knew had left them, Mr. Jenkins said, "It's been so long since I had someone to share my thoughts and dreams with. Nights have been extremely lonely." Emily understood and nodded. The deep desire in her eyes was the same. "I know what you mean. I know what you mean, John," she said in a soft voice that showed how alone she felt. "The empty hours can seem endless, can't they? And the silence can be deafening." As the night went on, the two like-minded people found comfort in the fact that they understood each other. It was like their hearts had found a safe haven in each other, a place where they could share their deepest fears and thoughts without fear of being judged or put down. They were very lonely, but the stories they had told each other helped them connect with each other. At that moment, they understood that friendship could come from the strangest places and at the strangest times, like a delicate flower. As the sky got darker, Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson saw a glimmer of hope that they might have found each other, the friendship and understanding they had worked so hard to find. What started out as a simple friendship quickly grew into something more meaningful. Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson felt better when they were with each other, and they were more open to the idea of being friends. Every day their bond grew stronger. They took long walks together, walking hand in hand through the cute streets of their town. It was like the ground beneath them knew how to make them feel at ease with each other, because of the way their steps linked together. When they felt like it, they would go into the nearby park and sit on a worn-out bench under an old oak tree. Emily would bring a picnic basket with their favorite sandwiches and fruit, and they would eat a simple meal while listening to birds sing and leaves rustle. As the sun went through the leaves above, it made dappled patterns of light and shade that would make the room feel peaceful and perfect for their growing love. The smell of home-cooked food and the sound of shared laughter often filled their evenings. They took turns cooking in Mr. Jenkins' cozy kitchen, which had been lonely before, but was now full of the happiness of being with each other. They enjoyed meals that had been passed down from generation to generation, while talking about family recipes and fond memories. As the hours went by, they would go back to the living room and talk while the flame flickered in the background. They talked about their hopes, their favorite memories, and how beautiful the little things in life are. The fact that they were no longer thinking and hoping alone gave them comfort. They knew they had each other to share the ups and downs of life. They were sitting on Mr. Jenkins' porch one evening when the sky turned pink and orange at dusk. Emily turned and looked at him with a smile on her face because she was so thankful. "John," she said with emotion in her voice, "I'm thankful for our friendship. It healed a hole in my heart I thought would never be filled." When Mr. Jenkins smiled, the warmth of their relationship showed in his eyes. "Emily," he said, "I agree with you. I'm so grateful that you made my life better." Locals were amazed as Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson's friendship continued to grow and get stronger. They saw how the two made each other better, and they were moved by how strong these two souls were after going through such terrible loss. People in the community came together to help the couple in many ways. Neighbors helped Mr. Jenkins and Emily with work and running errands, making sure they had everything they needed. They took care of Mr. Jenkins' yard by mowing the grass and giving extra attention to the bright flowers that were now blooming with even more energy. People started coming to Emily's house for tea and talk. The laughter that echoed through the walls showed how happy she was now. It became common to receive invitations to social events and meetings. Friends made sure that Mr. Jenkins and Emily were part of the town's social life. They were no longer alone because of their situation. Instead, they were welcomed into the community with open arms. At the market, the town baker, Mr. Davis, smiled and walked up to Mr. Jenkins as he picked out a piece of freshly baked bread. He said, "It warms my heart to see you two together. You've brought happiness back into each other's lives, and it's a reminder that love and companionship can be found at any age." Mr. Jenkins chose a beautiful fall afternoon with red and gold leaves that made the world look beautiful. He felt this was the right time to make the most important choice of his late life. He had been thinking about this idea for months and had played it over and over in his mind 100 times, each time making it more emotional and poetic than the last. He couldn't put it off any longer. Today, when the sun was shining and the sound of leaves rustling could be heard in the background, they watched many sunsets together and told each other secrets under the town's old oak tree. Now, even though very old, it was time to take their love to a whole new level. John took Emily to their favorite spot under the big oak tree. There they stood, hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the day for a moment. He took a deep breath and got down on one knee. His heart seemed to beat in time with the sound of the leaves moving. He took out a small satin box from his pocket and opened it to show a sparkling ring that had been passed down through generations. "Emily," John said, "I know I'm old. You're not young too, but would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife and feel young together?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the guy in front of her. She was so happy, she felt so young. She whispered, "Yes, John, yes." John, with his old hands, then put the beautiful ring on Emily's shaking finger, making their promise to each other. After a week, they got married in a small ceremony in Mr. Jenkins' house. All the neighbors were there, helping and sharing the old couple's best moments. All of them felt young again, happy again. A new adventure was coming in their last years on this earth. With each passing day, Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson's love grew stronger. They found comfort in each other's arms, knowing that they had found the companionship they had longed for. In their reunion, they discovered that it's never too late for love to flourish. And so, the story of Mr. Jenkins and Mrs. Anderson served as a reminder that love and companionship can come when least expected, even in the twilight years of life. Their love story continued to inspire those around them, a testament to the love of resilience, understanding, and the capacity for love at any age.